And the Early Childhood Development Centres Bill seeks exactly to be that strong and reliable base for the sector, to consistently provide good quality programs that give our young parents peace of mind when it comes to safety, to the well-being, and the development of their children. In short, this bill will ensure higher and more consistent quality standards across the early childhood sector. Before I go into the key provisions of the bill, I wish to thank members of this House, the early childhood sector, and the public for your support and valuable suggestions. The proposals in the bill were made through extensive consultations over the past 2 years with operators, parents, teachers, early childhood experts, industry partners, and the general public. Parents that came for AGDA's focus groups discussions, I think they came to appreciate and realize the amount of effort that operators and teachers had to put in to ensure that the preschool is safe and conducive for the children's development. AGDA received strong support on the need to raise center quality, and also we calibrated our proposals based on the feedback received by the different stakeholders. Madam Speaker, let me now move on to the key provisions of the bill. You will notice that the bill focuses on early childhood development. We emphasize holistic care and education as an integral part of our children's growth. In this regard, childcare centres and kindergartens will be collectively regulated as early childhood development centres under a common licensing framework which this harmonised bill is better able to support, rather than being separately regulated under the Childcare Centres Act and Education Act as they are today. What this means is that instead of the current lifetime subscription model for kindergartens, where they are registered one-off under the Education Act, all centres will now run on the renewal subscription model, which is already the practice for childcare centres today under the Childcare Centres Act. Centres essentially will be approved to operate for a period of time and will be reassessed when they renew their license tenures. Now, this places the need for centres to consciously put in effort to maintain the standards to continue their operations for another tenure. Key areas of focus include physical space norms and design, environmental safety and hygiene, program staff quality, and of course, staff-to-child ratios. Under the new framework, we will increase the maximum license tenure to 3 years, up from the current 2 years for childcare centres. Obviously, better quality centres will be awarded longer license tenures, and I think this will incentivize them and encourage them to perform better. The new 3-year license tenure recognizes a strong core of centres with consistently good regulatory track records of at least 2 consecutive 2-year licenses. So this is a substantial portion of childcare centres at over 500 centres today. AGDA officers will continue to conduct unannounced visits to centres periodically to ensure that centres maintain their standards. The focus of this bill is to regulate what we currently define today to be childcare centres and kindergartens. The bill therefore provides for the exclusion and exemption of premises where specialised services are provided to a niche group. It also excludes centres regulated under other legislations for distinctly different purposes or operated by or on behalf of the government, hence directly accountable to this House. Examples include enrichment centres, standalone foreign system kindergartens, kindergartens affiliated with foreign system primary schools, or kindergartens by the Ministry of Education. Such entities are currently not under AGDA's purview and will similarly not come under this new Act. As many of us can agree, people, especially teachers, are at the heart of every childhood development centre. Parts 3 and 4 of the bill has provisions to enable better and more consistent quality of staff who interact with children, especially early childhood professionals, given their important role during those formative years. For example, the bill will ensure that all principals and teachers meet the prevailing professional qualification requirements before assuming their appointments. In addition, all staff working in centres will also need to be approved by AGDA for their suitability before they can start work at centres. This will cover principals and teachers, cooks and cleaners, as well as enrichment vendor staff. All individuals will be assessed on a track record, especially pertaining to children's safety. One benefit of a common regulatory framework across the early childhood sector is a common administrative process to register staff. Now, this facilitates our teachers' movement between childcare centres and kindergartens, which many teachers had called for earlier. I also believe that this regulatory framework will also further enhance the professional standing and standards of our early childhood educators. Nevertheless, my ministry is very mindful of the manpower and other ground constraints faced by operators. They are fed back to us, and we do understand that. So as a regulator, AGDA will strive to ensure that its administrative processes are efficient and that its regulatory requirements are responsive to operators' needs while ensuring the quality and safety of our children. For example, AGDA is exploring allowing non-teaching staff, such as cooks and cleaners, to support trained teachers in supervising outdoor playtime. So the constant dialogue that we have with the sector must continue so that the feedback can come back to us, and that allows us to calibrate how we execute some of these ideas. As with any enterprise, good governance and management are critical success factors for early childhood development centres. Under Clause 19, AGDA will continue to prohibit unsuitable persons, such as those with poor regulatory track records, from managing the centre's business as board directors or chief executive officers, etc. The new bill will further prohibit recalcitrant operators whose licenses had been revoked from operating centres under another proxy. This allows AGDA to prevent such persons from continuing to misdirect centres. AGDA will also penalise licensees for knowingly allowing such unsuitable persons from managing their centre's business. As the operating environment of the early childhood sector is dynamic and it needs to be updated from time to time, Clause 51 of the bill will provide for subsidiary legislation to effect more specific operational requirements, and this will provide more clarity on the responsibilities of operators and centres. Under the subsidiary legislation, we intend to enhance some requirements and introduce new ones to raise quality standards, and we will continue to consult the sector on this. We will take reference from sector best practices and AGDA's prevailing guidelines. For example, as announced by the Nurture SG Task Force last week, centres with full-day programs will need to conduct at least 1 hour of physical activities daily and up from half an hour currently, and half an hour of which has to be conducted outdoors. Exposure to the outdoors will be beneficial for children in preventing the early onset of myopia. Even as we raise standards in the sector, we will streamline certain requirements which are no longer applicable for greater efficiency, especially those that place unnecessary administrative burden on our teachers, and the sector warmly welcomed these proposals when we consulted them earlier this month. Just as how the bill provides requirements for the set of centres, the bill also provides requirements for the orderly closures of centres under clauses 14 and 18. This is in view that in the past there had been cases where centres abruptly close. And while this has been few, the impact on the parents and the children involved can be quite significant. Thus, to minimize such occurrences, AGDA will be empowered to require centres to put in place measures to ensure orderly closure. These include giving parents and teachers advance notice of the upcoming service disruption and ceasing the enrolment of new children to the centre. Operators have worked hard to build the trust of parents by meeting the baseline standards. Today, errant operators form a small minority of the sector, but they undermine the hard work of the rest of the sector. AGDA takes regulatory breaches seriously, and a more comprehensive and a graduated penalty framework will enable AGDA to effectively and swiftly enforce requirements to safeguard the safety and well-being of our young children, and that's our foremost priority. More importantly, it serves as a deterrent against errant practices and behaviours. With this new penalty framework, administrative lapses will be decriminalised and replaced with administrative regulatory sanctions, and this will allow us a wider suite of regulatory sanctions ranging from public censures, administrative financial penalties of up to $5,000, a security deposit, remedial measures, and a shortening of license tenure. The type of penalty imposed eventually will depend on the severity of the breach and whether it was a repeated occurrence. The penalty will be proportionate to the breach, and at the same time, I would like to reassure operators that AGDA will continue to adopt a measured and a developmental approach in enforcing requirements by advising centres to rectify problems. One new regulatory sanction I would like to elaborate on is the requirement of a security deposit. I'm aware that operators are concerned about this requirement. The current intention is for the security deposit to apply only to the small number of centres with poor track records, such as centres with 2 consecutive 6-month licenses, which is the lowest license standard. And this security deposit is intended to spur such centres to raise their standards. We are also mindful that the security deposit amount should be calibrated appropriately and not be overly onerous on the centres. So we are looking at a $10,000 amount, which is twice the administrative financial penalty amount for contraventions. I encourage centres with a 6-month license to take their regulatory gaps seriously and to rectify their breaches quickly so as to avoid being required to put up a security deposit. At the same time, the bill provides for criminal penalty for contraventions which pose more serious risk to the safety and well-being of children. For example, the operation of unlicensed centres. Under the bill, such contraventions will incur a fine of up to $10,000 or an imprisonment term of up to 12 months. The maximum fine amount has been adjusted to align with recent legislations like the Private Education Act. Certain offences will be made compoundable at up to half of the maximum fine amount under Clause 42. Before AGDA determines any contraventions, its officers will investigate the cases thoroughly and establish the facts from a variety of sources. Very often, a child may be involved in a case, which makes investigations more complex. Hence, AGDA officers will need enhanced interrogative and investigative powers to effectively carry out their duties under the bill. Beyond the current powers to inspect centres, AGDA officers under Clause 37 will be empowered to search centres, interview persons, take photographs and videos of the centre, and obtain the necessary documents from the centre. These are powers similar to those available to other regulators in Singapore. As we put these powers in place, we will establish internal processes to ensure that AGDA officers will carry out the investigations fairly. I've just outlined a broad regulatory framework. We're expecting to commence the Act over the next year after gazetting the detailed regulatory requirements in subsidiary legislation and publishing the administrative procedures in the codes of practice. As kindergartens are less familiar with a licensing regime under Clause 54 of the bill, kindergartens will be given 1 year from the commencement of the Act to obtain the license. Since 2015, AGDA has also been conducting sector briefings to explain and consult on the new requirements, as well as conducting customized on-site guidance for kindergartens. In fact, I understand that actually many kindergartens have begun making adjustments to prepare for the new framework. And from my interactions with the sector, I'm actually confident that actually almost all our operators would be able to meet these requirements. I believe that clear and appropriate regulatory requirements are crucial in raising standards in the early childhood sector. For example, during my visit to Creative Thinkers Kindergarten in August last year, the principal, Ms. Sakina Dola, shared that a clear, common understanding among the principals, the teachers, and the support staff of AGDA's regulatory requirements will actually help centres organize themselves better and to improve. Madam Speaker, to summarize, the Early Childhood Development Centres Bill is an important milestone in raising the quality of early childhood care and education in Singapore so that we can give every child a good start. It will provide parents with greater confidence that we are making Singapore a good place, a great place to raise families. We receive strong support from parents, teachers, and operators on the need for this enhanced regulatory framework. The bill proposes, first, a common licensing framework for childcare centres and kindergartens. Second, all staff working in centres will need to be approved by AGDA to ensure their suitability to work with young children. In addition, there will also be clearer and more consistent requirements to guide centres in their operations. Finally, the requirements will be enforced through a more comprehensive but also a graduated enforcement framework, with enhanced investigative powers to strengthen ACDA's oversight over the sector. ACDA will also work with centres closely to facilitate a smooth transition. To conclude, the proposals in the bill will help to set a firm and consistent foundation, positioning the early childhood sector well for the future. It complements the many efforts by government to partner the sector to improve the quality, accessibility and affordability of early childhood development services in Singapore.